Hi, my name's Erwin, and this is the Poetry Lighthouse podcast. In today's episode, I had the pleasure to interview poet and writer Ben Wilson, who will talk about his new poetry collection, Life, Love, Other. Thank you. So, hi Ben, it's such a pleasure to have you here today to discuss your wonderful poetry collection, Life, Love, Other. So before we jump into reading your poems, I'm curious to know about a bit more about your experience in writing and your background in general. So could you
Sure.
give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ben Wilson. I am a professional writer and editor. I've been in journalism for 22 years now. I did a degree in journalism, and I've always loved the English language, always loved trying to come up with like clever turns of phrase, and have crafted out a career really on mainly writing about video games. I've always been a kind of mixture of really into sports, but a bit of a geek too. And that hybrid has served me quite well because I love writing about both those things. So I write a lot about games like FIFA and WWE, like the wrestling game. But I also think it's really good to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And before I started my career in journalism, one of the things that got me into writing was at school. I just used to love studying poetry. I used to love reading great poets. I used to love in English when we had to, go through poems in class and sort of pick them apart. I really loved the studious nature of that. And yes, so I've had a really enjoyable career. I'm very lucky to have been able to call journalism my career. And I edited my favorite magazine, the UK's official PlayStation magazine, for 5 years. And in my 40s now, I'm always trying to, I don't want this to sound like a sort of a talent show, but I'm always trying to kind of reinvent or push myself a bit harder. And the rediscovering that love of poetry I had in my teenage years is kind of in my theme, if you like, of 2023. And so that's the background that's led me to where I'm at the moment.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I saw that you've also written some articles for The Guardian. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
So
Congratulations on
again,
that.
back in the day, I've been fortunate enough to write for my favorite magazines, almost all of them, and for most of the UK's newspaper outlets. So The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Observer. I used to write about my football team, Crystal Palace. They used to have a section on, like, football fans would review the match on a Saturday and it would go in the paper on the Sunday. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And yeah, so it's been one of those careers where I've been very lucky to have ticked off a lot of my ambitions. And that's meant that having those things on my CV already, I still love doing those things. I'm really passionate about all the work I do. I am sports editor for a site called Games Radar on a freelance basis, and I love that role completely. At the same time, I wrote a book in 2020 about leaving social media for a year. And that book, I self-published it. There was almost no gaming in there at all. It was really interesting to push myself out of my comfort zone and write about themes like travel and love and the pandemic. The pandemic happened that year, and being off of Facebook and Twitter for that was a fascinating experience. And yeah, just that and my mental health is a big thing to me, and I'm going to read a mental health poem later. But writing about those other things, it adds strings to your bow, and it challenges you. I think it challenges your grey matter, challenges your brain to try and keep evolving. And hopefully that's something I will do for the rest of my career and the rest of my life. But yeah, it's been a real privilege to write for those newspapers, and hopefully there'll be more of that to come in the future.
That's wonderful. You have a huge background in writing. So I wonder, how do you find inspiration or motivation? Do you have any rituals or habits that you follow?
I mean, yeah, specific to poetry, I think I've always been a massive romantic, a big, silly, daft romantic from my teenage years. Always liked a romantic comedy movie. My favorite movies are all that kind of thing. My favorite film is a film called About Time, which is a Richard Curtis movie about a Cornish lad who falls in love with a girl, and it all goes a bit wrong. He realizes he can time travel, and he kind of travels back in time to try and, you know, fix things with this girl. And actually there's a father-son element to that film as well, which I won't go into. But a lot of my favorite films have always been romantic comedies. My favorite music are kind of like heartbreak songs. Everyone takes the mickey out of me for this, but I'm really into Taylor Swift. I think she writes amazing breakup songs. I remember like dating a girl 2 or 3 years ago, and she wanted a running playlist, and I sent her these 7 songs, and I'd only been seeing her for about a fortnight, but she replied and said, you know, all 7 of these songs are breakup songs, and we just got together. And hadn't thought about it, but I think that's kind of embedded in my DNA from being a teenager, really, is I'm a bit of a romantic. And I think if you look at all the great like Motown hits of the 50s and 60s, they're all love songs, you know. And I think that's embedded in all of us, that kind of search for love. And also when love goes wrong, that search for feeling that someone has been through this before and relating to it, and it helps steer you through it. So I think what really inspired me to write poetry in my teenage years was I was like I said, this sort of sports geek, and I had loads of girl friends, but they always used to call me sweet. I was the really reliable, straight-laced, sensible guy who, when they broke up with their boyfriends, they come to me for help. And I sort of loved that role, but I was like, I want a girlfriend. I want to fall in love. And so during that time, I got really into poetry, like I said, you know, studying English at school. I started writing myself, and I found that the best inspiration was, you know, being in my room, like longing for love in that Hollywood style. And it's a bit like, again, it's a bit daft to say it now, but it's the truth. And I would just write down my thoughts in sort of poetry form. And so what happened then was I wrote a lot during my school years, my university years. And I met someone when I was 21, and we were together for sort of 18 years, got married. And I suppose because that was pretty solid for a long time, that inspiration to write heartbreak poetry wasn't there, you know. So I fell out of and obviously I was doing a writing career, and there wasn't really time to explore the poetry aspect. And I would say sometimes with poetry, you can feel like a sort of imposter. I think when writing is your career, and you've established yourself, that's one thing. To write poetry is like a different skill. And to be successful with poetry is an even harder skill, I think. And so I didn't write any poetry for about 20 years. And then in 2021, I started dating an English teacher. So I should give you a bit of background. My marriage ended in 2019, all amicably. And so I've been on the dating scene, as it were, for like 4 years. And the reason I'm telling you that, it's a bit TMI, but the reason I'm telling you that is it feeds into like a lot of my poetry inspirations over the last 2 years. But I started dating this English teacher, and you can imagine a journalist dating an English teacher, our backgrounds being very, you know, words-based. One of the things I did to impress her after about 2 weeks was write a poem. And it's the first poem in the book. It's called Mow. It's about, I was mowing the garden one day, and I got this message through on Tinder, and it was this English teacher. And I'm not normally spontaneous at all, but it was a summer's day, and we worked out where we went. We were like, should we just meet up and go for a walk? And we went having clicked, you know, having matched on Tinder 2 hours earlier. We went for a walk and a drink, and we ended up together for 6 months. And I wrote a poem about that. So the first poem in the book, Mow, is about that. And from there, really, the 2 years since then, that relationship ended. You know, it was nice, but that ended after 6 months, and I had some time to myself, and then had another relationship. And I think the inspiration for me has come from those times where you meet someone new and you write about the excitement of that, or when something goes wrong, when it ends, you write about the feelings that are inside you. And if we go back to someone like Taylor Swift, the reason I think she is now the most famous singer in the world is because people really relate to her breakup songs. She's a great storyteller, but there's like a line in one of her songs, All Too Well, where it's mostly about her relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal. And one of the lines is, you call me up again just to break me like a promise, so casually cruel in the name of being honest. And it's a really poetic line. And I think anyone who's been through a heartbreak has had that, where you're kind of, you know your relationship's on its way out, and you know maybe your partner will call you up with that premise of being honest with you, but they'll say something that's actually more heartbreaking, you know. So I think my inspiration has always been to try and take my relationships and make them relatable. And, you know, whether people find it odd, a 43-year-old man doing that, you know, some people might find that odd, you know, like generally the people who put themselves out and about in terms of, you know, talking about relationships are younger and more, let's say, more maybe just better looking, you know. But it's something I do unashamedly, because I think the more, particularly among men my age, with things like mental health, the more you share those experiences, the more other people relate to them, I think it's healthier for everyone.
I think everything you've covered right now, it perfectly describes what your poetry collection is, as you call it, Life, Love, and Other. It's basically, it encompasses all of these kind of experiences that you get throughout your life, from being in a relationship or having all these emotions that suddenly burst out, which is really important. And also, I love Taylor Swift, so I can totally relate to it. She's such a great songwriter, and her lyrics are always so powerful and poetic as well, which I really admire. So yeah, absolutely, I see how the inspiration comes from all these outlets. So it's that's wonderful.
Thank you.
So great. Now, I would like to ask you, how was the whole self-publishing experience for you during this for this poetry collection?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting year. So it started out, I had my most recent serious relationship had ended in January, and it was one of those situations that was quite amicable. This is the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with, but we wanted different things. I won't go into them because they're private. We wanted different things longer term, and you start getting this feeling, and it's a very bittersweet feeling that, you know, you're going to have to let each other go. And so across, and I'll go into some specific details because they lead specific poems later. But across January and February, it became clear that this relationship wasn't going to last, say, this calendar year. And then we split up in mid-February, and the way people react to relationships ending, everyone is different, and I respect everyone's way of doing it. For me, my thing was to, you know, some people jump straight into rebounds, or some people go on the internet and, you know, post, have you heard of thirst traps? You know, post pictures of themselves living their best life, you know, kind of, I don't need you anymore. And it's all a bit of a, having written, you know, about social media in my book, you know, about being off social media. It's, people have different reactions. And for me, I didn't want a public reaction. I respected my ex a lot. I loved her a lot. Our reasons for splitting up were authentic and important in terms of our long-term goals. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be the guy going out there going, look at how much better I am without my ex, because I didn't feel that way at the time. And so what I did was I started working once a week at a very close friend of mine called Sarah May, who's had her own relationship journey. And every Tuesday, so I'm a freelance writer, she's a freelance artist. And it was really good having a kind of solid work environment every Tuesday where it felt like an office, but we were bouncing off each other, talking through things. And she is secretly, and she'll hate me for saying this, she's secretly also a really good poet. And she read me one of her poems, and I was like, you have to publish this. She was like, no chance, no way. And then she said, you must have like loads of poetry. Knowing the person you are, you must have loads of poetry stashed away. I was like, yep. And she said, oh, we should have like a reading. And I just went, nope. And every week for about a month, she would nag me. She was like, have you got your poetry books out yet? And I was like, nope. And basically, when I used to write, when I was like 18 to 21, I had these like French vocabulary books, like purple vocabulary books. And I would nick them from French class and like fill them with poetry over sort of, you know, it took about 3 or 4 months to fill each one. And then one day she very encouragingly wore me down. And one day I took these books round, and I had deliberately and quite self-effacingly only chosen the bad ones to read to her. Because you can imagine, from 16 to 19, 20, desperate for a girlfriend, some of the stuff I wrote was atrocious. It was like heartbroken or angry, like, you know, that stuff that, I mean, it makes me wince. And if I was ever a successful poet, I think what I might do is try and publish like the worst poetry book you've ever read, just really cringy, teenagey stuff. And of course, so I read these poems to her, and we were both laughing. And then I was like, and here's some that might be good. And she loved them. And the great thing about that friendship, in terms of the art she makes and the words I do, is we're very honest with each other. I think a good friendship is one where you can be constructively critical. And when I read her the terrible poem, she was like, "Yeah, mate, that's awful, or properly awful," because we were all laughing. And then when I read her ones that I thought were good, she was like, "That one's brilliant." And then over so when we got to about March, end of March, and I've been off social media for 5-6 weeks. I'm healing from, like, you know, what's gone on in January and February. And then she said, "You know, you have to do a book." And I said, "No chance, I'm not publishing these." And she said, "Benjamin, you spent a year off social media painstakingly writing a diary and then constructing it into a book, and it must have taken you hundreds, if not thousands of hours to self-publish that. You're sat on this amazing poetry," her words, not mine, amazing. "You're sat on this amazing poetry that you could knock together into a book in like a week, and you won't do it. Why not?" And I was like, "I just don't know if I want it out there." And the thing that people loved about the social media book, if you read the Amazon reviews, is that I was very honest and open about mental health and falling in love and breaking up, and you know, running and losing weight and my past. And I realized kind of the poetry book was again like it kind of continued those themes, but of course it's much more easily digestible because you can read it in 20 minutes rather than have to read it in a day or 3 days. So Sarah May, it's all her fault, but I love her for that. She convinced me to do it. And then from there, the actual process was fairly simple. I had about, I had 20 to 25 older poems we picked out that we liked. But then, of course, like February, March, April was really productive in terms of being able to write quite passionately about my last relationship. And I don't just mean in terms of the breakup. I would sort of revisit how I felt in a good way and write poems about that. And then revisit, you know, or I was still living the heartbreak element of it. And I gradually from that, I sort of filled this book, and then I would send certain poems to trusted friends. And I'd be like, I'm not sending you this to just tell me it's great. I need to know what's good and isn't good. And between about 3 or 4 friends, we cherry picked the best 30 odd, and I wanted 33. And, you know, there's that sort of thing where some of them were too similar, so I had to take one out. Some of them were too personal, I realized. 2 of the best poems I think I've ever written were written about that relationship that ended in January. And I've sat on them because it felt like a bit disrespectful to my ex-partner to have them in the book at this point. I don't really know what's going on in her life, but at the same time, if you put something in the public eye and someone recognizes it's about them, then that is a big responsibility to take. And like I said, you know, singers do it all the time, but I felt for me, the 2 of the ones I've kept back are a bit too specific to us. And I will publish them at some point. One of them I'm hoping to put towards like poetry competitions next year. But yeah, even and little things which we're going to talk about later, that's probably the most personal poem in the book that was left remaining. But from there, because I'd had the experience of doing 1 year without social media, I just repeated the format that I'd taken with that in terms of like putting it all into a Word doc, saving it into a PDF, uploading it to Amazon. So the Amazon KDP process, I would say, is to anyone who wants to self-publish a poetry book, once you're into it, it's fairly straightforward. If your ambitions with your poetry are not to make money, just have that sensation of like having published your own book and have it there on Amazon for the rest of your life, you know, whether it sells 1 copy, 10 copies, or 100 copies, it's a fairly straightforward process. And then actually the complicated part is then transferring it to an ebook Kindle file. Because of course, when you publish a book, you get to choose the formatting. You know, you get to, I've obviously got the book here. You know, you can choose the spacing, the formatting, the line breaks. With Kindle, you have to design it so that anyone can change the font size, the style of font. So you have to make it much more generic. And there's a slightly, particularly with poetry, it's sort of an upsetting element to that, where you're like, oh, am I turning my poems to just like a few lines of text, and someone else is going to play around with what they look like? But you kind of have to get over that. And that is actually the most complicated process, is turning it into a Kindle version. And it's lucky I had the experience of doing the longer book for that. That is a bit where if you've not done it before, you might need some help. But yeah, no, I just I uploaded it to Amazon. It's an Amazon exclusive, and it was ready to roll in July. And I've been promoting it gently on Instagram and in person. I did like a reading in a bookshop, a very famous bookshop, Waterstones in Bristol, and it's been a exhilarating experience, but an exhausting one too. It's you know, as you guys know, the amazing job you do, it's a thrilling thing to have stuff out there, But in terms of keeping up with replies and making sure you're posting content regularly, it does take it out of you. But that is a proper first world problem to have.
Well, that was a really good answer for all of this
Thank you.
question, and I'm really glad that you have friends that encourage you to, get your poetry out there, because sometimes
Yeah.
it's quite a vulnerable thing to, put all your feelings and real emotions and your thoughts out into the world. So I do understand that, but I'm really glad that you did, because I think you allow us to connect with your feelings as well, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who go through the same things, and I think that's a really beautiful way of expressing all of this and putting it out there. So thank you for that. And also now for let's jump straight into the poems. So I have your book right here. We're going to do some readings. We have 3 poems that you've chosen. The first one is Keep Going. So,
yes, correct.
but before we start reading this first poem, could you give us a little bit of background or context about the poem Keep Going?
Yes, certainly. So one of my journeys over the last few years has been, my marriage ended in 2019, and I was gradually aware throughout my 30s, really, that I suffered a lot from depression, anxiety, things that a lot of people are becoming aware of in the last half decade, and I think that's a really healthy thing. And when I wrote 1 Year Without Social Media, the most important element of that book was it came out, and I had 2 friends contact me after it came out, 2 male friends my age, who seemed like the most happy, laid-back characters you could ever meet. And I obviously won't go into the details of what they said, but they both emailed me to say that they had read my book and realized that they were suffering from, well, I won't go into details what they were suffering from, but they had made appointments to get their mental health looked at. And that was, and I really, really mean this, that was more important than any sales figures, any positive review. The fact it affected 2 friends' lives to the point of getting themselves looked at was huge. And so you fast forward to me writing this poetry book, and as you know, it's called Life, Love, Other. And a quarter of the, so in terms of structuring the book, there is, you may have noticed as you go through, there's more kind of falling in love poems in the first half and more breakup poems in the second half. And there's probably, I hope there would be a sort of an effect in the book where you read off, you start off quite positive, and then your mood dips in the middle from like a breakup, and then towards the end there's a bit more uplifting stuff. And so in the terms of the themes I had in the book, I had 1/4 of the themes were love won, if you like. 1/4 of the themes were love lost. And there's, as you know, a mixture of stuff, like there's a poem about a toothbrush and there's a poem about the moon. But what I realized was there was only 1 poem in there that was specifically about mental health, which is called Life is in Pain. And it's a very dark poem. And it reflects a period of my life. It's very authentic to the period where I felt every day like my world was ending and I didn't know what to do. And it's actually written when I was about 17, 18. But still, I think we all have days like that now. And that's one of the poems people I know relate to. So as I said, I got to about 30 poems in this book. And I realized I didn't have enough mental health representation in there. And it's such an important thing to me. It's why when you asked about doing the readings today, I wanted to do the mental health frame first, because it's really, really important to me. That whole notion of, thankfully, we're moving away from the era of man up, and we're moving more towards the era of people being able to share what they're going through. And with men my age, it's still a really high suicide rate. One of the highest suicide rates among men my age, or the reasons behind it, is mental health stuff. And I think it's really important to keep that conversation going. So I wanted to write this poem that was kind of based around my experiences, but that people could relate to, and that was a bit more positive than Life is in Pain. That was like basically, saying to someone, almost talking to me 10 years ago, saying to someone, this is what you're going through, but keep going. And I wrote this poem down, and I started off, my writing process is normally just like get it down and then go back and edit it. And I knew what I wanted from the structure of this poem was 3 lines that rhymed. And then at the end of those 3 lines, keep going, keep going, keep going. So I wrote this structure really quickly, took about 15 minutes with the most sort of simple rhymes I could think of. And then once I'd done that, I sent it to a few people, and people loved it. And they were like, this is so relatable. You've got to put this in the book. So then what I did from there was I would go back into the poem, and I'm quite close to the publication date here. It's the very last poem in the book. And I tidy up and I make it a bit cleverer. I like I said, I love turns of phrases, I love playing around the English language, and I love coming up with lines where like kind of you surprise people, okay? But again, it's really helpful having honest friends, because I did like 2 or 3 updated versions of this poem and then sent them to people, and they were like, no, you're trying to be too clever, you've lost the relatability. Because the whole idea of this poem is that it does keep it simple. It's that sort of thing where you would read it on Facebook or Insta or anywhere and go, yeah, that's how I feel. And again, like a lot of again, we look at pop songs, whether it's like the 80s or 90s, everyone getting rickrolled by Never Gonna Give You Up. Sometimes a lot of the best pop songs, look at Perfect by Ed Sheeran. That is a wonderful, wonderful pop song, catchy and memorable. But it's also really simple in terms of like the chords, the structure. And sometimes those things that catch on, it's almost like the simpler you make it, the better. And so in the end, I couldn't get this poem right, and I took it out of the book because my friends, it is really handy having constructive criticism, but also my friends didn't like the revised version. I didn't like the original version. I was like, I'm just not putting it in there. And so I put another poem in, and then like right up to about 2 days before the book went to up on Amazon, I was like, no, I need to have that poem in there. And I was like, just trust your friends, trust them. And I ended up going with the version my friends like and I didn't like. And it's been the poem that's had the most reaction on Instagram, the most reaction on TikTok. I've had 2 or 3 friends who've been through really personal stuff. One of them who's been through stuff that I can't even hint at on here, who have messaged and said it brought them to tears. And, that is, for someone to react in that way to one of your poems is a really powerful thing. And again, it's like validation for the thing where you do a project that's not about sales. And I suppose it is a little bit about, ego, in terms of like, you want to write stuff that people love, and you want to share your stuff with people and hope they relate to it. But for something like that, when you're bringing someone to cry with your words, and not because they're terrible, is a really powerful thing. And so, yeah, I'm glad it's in there, and it's an honor to be able to read it to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, all of that, background of the poem. I think it's very important to bring all these issues, into the pages of poetry and, days, because, and I thank you so much for that, because there's a lot of people who suffer from mental health, and it's more people than we can imagine. Almost,
Yes.
I would say everyone pretty much at a certain point in their lives go through it. And I think poetry is one of the most beautiful ways in which, and it's really fast, you can read it in one sitting, which is just incredibly good. And this is very uplifting as well. It's not one of those poems that bring you down. It gives you hope, and I think that's really beautiful. And I'm so glad that you have had such a great impact on the people around you, because I think that's one of the biggest achievements that anyone could feel as a writer, to be able to help others. And even if it's just one person, like, that's a huge achievement. So I'm so glad that you're doing this, because you're helping people, and that's amazing. So thank you about that. So can you now read us your poem, Keep Going, please?
Yes. So this is Keep Going from Life, Love, Other. It's over now. You cannot breathe. Salty tears moisten your sleeve. The inner burning makes you heave. Keep going. Keep going, keep going. Suffocated by hurt and heat, oceans of sweat, war gun heartbeat, limp shoulders pinned against the sheets. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Lungs constricted by the dawn crush, mind of jelly, limbs turned to mush, brain detonating in the hush. Keep going, keep going, keep going. It was not you. It is not you. Stop turning red flags into blue. Hijack the lies, embrace the true. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And take my word, this is no end. Please call your family, text a friend. I swear that you will mend. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful reading. I really felt it with all the rhymes are so beautiful, and I really enjoyed how each stands out with so much imagery and the excellent metaphors. I loved especially the one that says mind of jelly, limbs turned to mush. I think that was really clever, and I really liked it. It really tells us how we feel at those moments of despair. And also the lexicon that you've selected sounds to me a bit like an inner battle, like some sort of hopelessness. And it feels like, because you have some words like the guns and detonating brain. So it's like all of these explosions amidst silence. So nobody's hearing your pain. It's like you're alone on this, and it feels like a huge kind of impact that nobody is taking care of, or nobody seems to care.
Yes.
And I think what's even more kind of important about this poem, and I think it's really beautiful, is the fact that this repetition of keep going, it gives us this kind of it's kind of cheering us up, you're not alone, and I'm pretty sure that you will get through this. Just keep going, don't give up. And I think that's one of the fact that it's repeated over and over, it just makes me, it kind of echoes in our heads, and it makes us, it's that little voice that comes to us that says keep going. And I think for people who are feeling extremely down and low, I think having this little voice in their heads that tells them keep going can make the difference, can make all the difference. And so that's brilliant. This poem really achieves it really well. So I wonder, so the narrator, as you said, is pretty much an ominous kind of omniscient voice calling out to, or basically, well, from your thoughts, that's calling out to all these people who are feeling a bit whether anxious or with depression, or having some mental issues, as we all do. And I think this poem definitely is one of the greatest poems on depression or mental health issues that I've read, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for reading it. This was the first part of our interview with Ben Wilson. Please click on the next episode to listen to the second part. Thank you for listening to the Poetry Lighthouse. If you liked this episode, don't forget to share and subscribe to our podcast. You can also visit our website, thepoetrylighthouse.com, where you can read and submit your works of poetry and short stories. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to keep updated. This is the end of the episode. Thanks again, and see you next time.